Okay, what I'd like to do now is invite Ivan and Dominic to come up to the stage for the interactive bit. And what we're asking you to do is two questions that Dominic and Ivan set just previously. The first one, of course, is it seems to a lot of us that it is utterly self-evident that higher levels of involvement equal lower levels of risk and accidents and productivity. And as Ivan has made the case, high levels of well-being at work, the same. So the question for you at your tables, if you could just take 5 minutes to discuss this, please, is why isn't everybody doing it? Yep. What obstacles have you seen on your travels, in your experience, that stops people striving to maximise workforce involvement and maximise workforce well-being? If you could just take 5 minutes and then report back, please. Okay, I'll ask a table, please, to contribute what they're thinking. And as Dom makes his way back to the stage, as you come up with a challenge or an observation or a thought, either Ivan or Dom will respond to you as seems most appropriate. What do you think? Why isn't everybody doing it to the best of their ability as a standard?
We were talking about...
Yes, yes, yes.
Just going back to the Formula One presentation, we were very impressed by the 2-second tyre change. And the thing that we don't have in our industry, I guess, is the potential to specialise to that degree. There's many people in... Say the offshore workers, for example, who have multiple tasks, and they can't just specialize on one thing and exercise on it so hard that they get it down to a 2-second valve change or something like that. Yeah, they've got other schedule constraints, pressures, tasks, and priorities which they're constantly juggling, and it doesn't allow them to get to a very high performance level. Is posing the difference between that kind of approach. We can't specialize. We have to multitask. And I went to a recent training thing on resilience training, and they were talking about the fact that multitasking actually has the same effect on you as you're coming to work drunk, because you're not focusing on the tasks, the individual tasks, as focused as you would be if you were doing them, one at a time.
So you're not talking about focus here, you're talking about overload, really.
Yeah, I guess nowadays we're trying to reduce the manning. We're trying to, but the number of tasks is increasing with aging facilities and things like this. So.
Yeah. Initially it sounded like variety, which is a good thing, but you're talking about overload, aren't you, really?
Yeah, it's bordering on overload, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I think this is billed as a debate session, and debate should have disagreement, so I'm going to disagree with what you've said. Well, my point really is that it sounded like you were saying, yes, but our sector is unique. And I've heard that argument from many other sectors. I've heard it from retail, I've heard it from the police, I've heard it from the armed forces, and so on. And I've never actually believed that it's really a sustainable argument. And I know next to nothing about offshore oil and gas, but I would assert that I think it's very unlikely that you are unique and therefore can't address these issues. I'm sure that, I don't know whether Mark's still here, whether...
He's gone.
All right, but I guess if Mark was here, he would say, actually, it's not as easy as that. Yeah, we can focus on something, but look at how quickly they did it, for one thing. It seemed absolutely impossible to do 3 seconds, and then they did 2. So, yeah, well, I've said what I'm saying. I don't take on board your point that it's kind of too difficult or you're unique.
Can I interject with one comment? And it goes to where they got it from 3 seconds down to 2 seconds. And if I'm correct, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, Mark said that those guys went away for 2 months or 3 months, and they rehearsed and they rehearsed and they rehearsed. And they rehearsed to the point that they couldn't get it wrong. What do we do when it comes to training and safety training in the industry? We train people till they can get it right. We don't take the extra step to get them to the point where they can never get it wrong. So even if you multitask, I used to be in the British Army when I was 17 through around about 23. And I was taught lots of different skills that were always coming in, different things. If you think in a battle, you're not just doing one thing, there's all sorts going on. And one of the things I was taught was to strip a weapon down and put it back together blindfold in less than 30 seconds, because you might have to do it in the dark. People don't always attack during the day. And 20 years later, I went to a fair, and there were Royal Engineers, and I was chatting with a guy, and I was talking about we used to do these things. He says, do you think you can still do it? I don't know. And I had my twins with me. They were about 10 at the time. And he says, come in the tent. So he put a blindfold on me, and I did it in 29 seconds. I hadn't touched that weapon for 20 years. But I've been rehearsing and rehearsing and rehearsing when I was learning the skill. So within the industry, to get around some of the points that you're making, is there an opportunity to actually make sure the training that we do is effective and we give people the opportunities to rehearse?
Another table, please.
Good question, by the way. Good.
Another table, please.
Hi, Lee Brown, Mouse Squad. I'd just like to make an observation, really. I think that in a lot of aspects, we're good at the mechanical side of things and we're good at problem solving, but I don't feel that we're really particularly good at understanding human factors and the taboos around our own individuality. By that I mean, you get an offshore platform where there's maybe 50 guys working closely together. They may be really, really good at the process safety side of things or the processes, but are they really good at understanding each other? Are they good at understanding the taboos about their working environment and how they interact with each other? It's a sign of weakness for a lot of people to ask for help. Do we allow management to come in and make a few points, make a few adjustments, or do we feel that we've been encroached on by management because all of a sudden management's taken over how we're expected to feel and react? So I kind of get the feeling that safety's moved on so much in a short space of time, really, if you look at it in the bigger perspective. But do we feel that as individuals that we're moving at the same rate, with the same level of understanding?
Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting observation, and certainly in the area that I know most about. In terms of people talking about psychological issues or even teamwork and relationship issues, in an environment where needing help is seen as a sign of weakness and is seen in a negative way, it limits the extent to which people are prepared to do that. And, you know, I think what you've said seems to me to be a very interesting and accurate observation. How you overcome that is again back to the cultural issue, I think, which we've talked about or has been talked about a lot today. You know, we've done a lot of work recently in the financial services sector in the UK. Now it's a sector where there isn't very much physical risk, but there's a great deal of psychological risk. And for example, the chief executive of one of the big banks actually had to leave work and was off work for 6 months with psychological problems. I spoke to somebody else from that particular bank sometime after he'd eventually gone back to work, and they said it hasn't really changed a thing. It's still dangerous to admit that you've got any kind of psychological issue in our workplace, because you're expected to work sometimes round the clock, keep going and not be troubled by it at all. And people aren't like that. It can't happen.
Thank you.
Okay, can we call in Ben at this point? You know, obviously Pearl Village is held up as an exemplar for a holistic approach to this whole thing. Could you answer the question? You know, why isn't everybody doing the sort of things that you did there? And indeed, did you do the sort of things that you reputed to do there?
Yeah, so I think one of the things I would say is, you know, why don't organisations set about more employee involvement and engagement? I think, you know, perhaps one of the reasons is that up front there's a lot of work to be done, and so it's clear that there's hard work, and that'll come at a cost to the organisation. And so that's weighs on the side of certainty. You know, this is the effort that it's going to take, and this is what it's going to cost. But the outcome and the benefits from it are largely uncertain. You know, you don't know how far this journey is going to take you and what you're actually going to get from it. So I think that sometimes plays in the decision, or maybe sometimes plays in the fact that you don't get so much employee engagement. But in terms of what we did at the camp, yeah, there was a huge amount of involvement, both in the way that we planned, let's say, the welfare activities. You know, we would have a lot of engagement with each of the contractors to understand what the workers wanted, for instance, and then the welfare team would try and respond to those sorts of needs. So there was a constant dialogue between the central project management team, which also involved the camp management team, and also the contractors about what they wanted and what worked for them. But of course, you know, we would try stuff, and some of it worked and some of it didn't work, and what didn't work, we'd go back and do a different way.
Okay, and the sort of factors that Ivan was talking about, I mean, I don't know if you had any measures of those, but the positives and the negatives, did you see that? Did you even have any measures of that?
No, I don't think we had any measures of sort of psychological well-being. I mean, I know that we did put in place the camp aunts and uncles, and that was really to try and deal with issues up front, so that we didn't have you know, the outcomes that Ivan was talking about, and it was a sort of, we took it in a staged approach, so that if someone you know, was having difficulty dealing with, for instance, living away from home, or the work or their living environment, they'd be able to talk to a camp aunt or uncle, and if the camp aunt or uncle wasn't able to deal with it, they'd be able to refer them to a psychologist. So we tried to deal with it up front in that way.
Yeah, when I heard you talk about that, I wanted to ask you, and I will now, when you had the psychologists and the welfare team, and people could go to them for counselling, you obviously have a feedback loop for a physical accident where it's reported, and then you look at the root cause and then try and do something about it. Did you do the same with workplace issues that led people to have psychological problems, or was that feedback loop not completed in the same way?
We would have it, but it was in more of I don't want to say unstructured, but it was a bit more ad hoc. So, you know, if we were hearing certain things about a particular contractor, either from the camp aunts or uncles or from the psychologist, then we would go and talk about it to the contractor on a no-name basis, because we needed to protect the identity of the people that were having the issues. And so the psychologists would often talk to us about some of the things that people were coming to talk to them about.
Yeah.
Okay, please, gentleman at the back there. Yeah, it's on this way.
Yeah, so my name is Fons from Shell. Also worked 5 years in Pearl GTL, but now in the health and safety function, and then one of the startup managers. The thing I'd like to add to Ben, and coming into the role now, what we look back on, is that things like the suicide rates that we had in the camp in Pearl were actually much lower than the typical suicide rate you'd have for these large populations. Yeah? And suicide in the sub-Asian countries is actually quite a high prevalence. And so the direct kind of feedback or of a very strong lagging indicator is that you really saw performance improvement. And we're seeing the same in Oman. I mean, Oman is an operation where we've got 60,000 people working year in, year out. Yeah? So it's a giant operation. Again, many contractors from India and Pakistan there. And we've gone even beyond the Pearl levels there with the permanent accommodation camps on quality. And what we're seeing there again is impact on lower suicides and also lower non-accidental deaths in terms of well-being. And the kind of key things we do look at are the stresses. So is it financial stress, internal money lending, things like agency fees for people to come from places like Nepal before they even get their work permit, and so therefore putting a phenomenal financial burden on them. So we do investigate and really try to identify what the stresses are and work through our contracting strategies and also how you bring people in to reduce those risks.
It sounds like you're placing people into an environment that's actually more psychologically healthy than their normal environment.
Absolutely. The non-accidental death and suicide rates that we have for the guys working, whether it be in PDO in Oman or in Pearl, is a much lower incident and accident and early death rate than you'd have for the average people in the subcontinent in India and Pakistan. Yeah, it's definitely better.
Please, gentleman here.
Hi. I guess the question was, why is workforce involvement not more prevalent? I'm Graham Gordon with Hess, Drilling Superintendent. I've probably drilled for over 30 oil companies around the world. I think the bottom line is cost. Well, the management don't understand the benefits of it, but there's a cost part of it as well, where, we've got a budget. I mean, I've just put together a hazard recognition course for 2 days, $250,000. All the training that I've been doing for this campaign is probably several $1 million. And to try and get that approved by management, it's not a problem with Hess, they're very good, but with all these smaller companies, they just don't see the benefit of it. It's okay with the Exxon Mobils and the Shells and the BPs, they'll give that budget, but most companies, smaller companies, they don't see the benefit of it. And that's why it doesn't happen.
Dominic, you want us?
Yeah, I would say that, Foster Wheeler, the big construction company. Dave Stewart and Andy Townsend in 1999, when Andy was at the University of Southampton, went through 17 years worth of productivity, quality data and so on for Foster Wheeler. And they worked out that for every 50% improvement you had in safety, on average, you got a corresponding 12% improvement in productivity, whatever that might be defined as. So if we know that for every 50% improvement in safety performance, we get this corresponding improvement in productivity, and the more we involve and engage the workforce, alleviate the workload of the managers, because that's reducing the workload of a lot of the managers, helping out the safety guys, the campaigns that you're paying for the Hearts and Minds campaigns, all of the activities that you do, you have safety meetings, you usually have safety meetings every morning at the beginning of a shift and so on, but if the guys have presented the material instead of the HSE coming up with a corporate thing that you send out, the guys own it, that's not an awful lot of money involved in it. You can localize that engagement. It doesn't necessarily have to be an across-the-board thing with all the same stuff. So for me, the benefits are there. I see the benefits, and I see the benefits pretty much any industry I go in, whether it's aviation, whether it's steel, whether it's aluminium, or whatever. The benefits there are. But you're right, there is that upfront initial cost to get the ball running, or they get the hair running, as it were. So yeah, you've got that. You've got the guidelines to set what does this involvement mean. When we say review the procedures, what does that mean? And by and large, it means you take a procedure once a week, once a month. You look at it, particularly the ones where you get a lot of non-compliance, say, hey guys, what's wrong with this procedure? What is it about this procedure that's leading a lot of people to not comply? And from that, it could be that you have resourcing issues, it could be PPE issues, it could be job planning issues. When we've done stuff on potential SIFs, we identified that job planning was the root of around about 50% of the potential SIFs. So maybe these things would surface as well. So that there's the main benefit of getting people involved, reducing your injury rates, but there's the side benefits where you're improving the efficiency and reliability of your operations, as well as moving your safety culture down on the maturity towards excellence. So there are a lot of benefits, but I guess it's putting it in a format that the fund holders can buy into and say, sure, here's some resources, let's pilot. Because you can always pilot these things. You don't have to do one big mass scale. You can take it small scale, build on the steps, and then go to the next piece. And hazard ID has got to be good for everybody. It should be part of your training, your industry standard training. Everybody should have hazard ID training, at the very, very least.
I can't say you're preaching to the converted here, but I'm just saying that in a lot of the organisations, it comes down to cost.
Yeah, I think the issue you've raised, actually, I think there's in terms of the response that you get, there's an issue about people's familiarity and their belief with about what's being proposed, because essentially what you're saying is, and I had a conversation with somebody the other day about this, they were looking at some evidence and saying, for every £1 that you invest in this, you'll get £4 back. And that this was related to psychological health and safety. But the £4 doesn't come back immediately. You have to wait, and you have to commit the £1 now. And so what happens when you put that on the table is people will go, well, yeah, I could do that. Or on the other hand, I could buy extra equipment or more efficient equipment here, and it will increase productivity straight away, and it's guaranteed. And so that's what they do, and they don't put into something that's a bit less certain, a bit less guaranteed, and it's down the road, it's around the corner, it's next year, the year after, or whatever. And I think that's a barrier. Yeah. Until people get it really culturally normal.
Yeah. There's certainly something in the safety world we understand, APC analysis, soon certain and positives, delayed positives, and so on. It's a psychology that's very well understood in the world of oil and gas. And
certainly in the drilling industry, where it's 1 well, 2 wells, and then so it's maybe 2 or 3 months, and you get rid of that project's finished. You don't have the time to, it's not a 2-3 year period where you can develop that culture. Yeah. It's a bang in and out.
I might take, it's been a very long day today, hasn't it? But a very good day, I think. So could I please have a big round of applause for Professor Dominic, Professor Ivan.